This is the Edexcel IGCSE January 2023 Biology Paper 1, suitable for both double and triple award. So this question, we need to label the lung. Let's just revise the entire diagram. Now, this bit, that is a trachea. So when you breathe in air, which is what you're doing right now, it will travel down the trachea, and then the trachea splits into the two bronchi. There's another lung here, right? This is your right lung, this is your left lung. So they only drew one lung here. So therefore, this and also this, these would be the bronchi. Now, bronchus is the singular. But if you talk about them together, it will be bronchi. You have one trachea and two bronchi. Then the bronchi, each of them, will then split into smaller branches, and these are called the bronchiole, and that's actually what X is, bronchiole. And then finally, the very end, these very end bits of the branches, those will be called the alveoli. Again, one of them is alveolus, and then all of them, or more than one, would be alveoli. So the answer will be bronchiole. Okay, next question here. It says, which of these describes what happens when a person breathes in? So let's revise the whole concept. When you breathe in, which is inhale, and then when you breathe out, which is exhale, what happens to three things? The first one is the diaphragm. The second one is the intercostal muscle. And the third one is the volume of your thorax. What your thorax is just this whole area is called your thorax. What happens to that volume? So the first two are muscles. And the easy thing is they both do the same thing for inhale. They both contract. Remember, muscles can either contract or relax. So don't mention anything else when you describe muscles. So they both contract. And when the diaphragm contracts, it moves down. So therefore, when you breathe out, when you exhale, the diaphragm will do the opposite, which is relax, and it will move up. So for intercostal muscles, when it contracts, it moves the ribs up and out, which if you think about it, if you take a deep breath right now, what's happening to your ribs? You can literally see a rise, isn't it? So that's the up and out. And conversely, when you exhale, the intercostal muscles will relax. And what's the opposite of up and out? It will be down and in. So you will say, oh, my ribs will move down and in. And finally, for the volume of your thorax, when you inhale, deep breath, you can feel the volume increase, right? So increase volume. And then when you breathe out, you can feel your chest sink in, and that is decrease in volume. So if this was a long answer, that's what you would cover. These three things, if they ask you anything about inhale or exhale. So back to this question then, when you breathe in, that will be inhale. The diaphragm contracts, therefore it's got to be either A or B. And when it contracts, it will move down, downwards. Answer is A. Okay, next question. So this is a table that shows you the percentage of gas, these three gases, in inhaled and exhaled air. So just take a look at it first before you even look at the question. Just try to understand the table. For oxygen, when you inhale is 20, and then when you exhale is 16%. Therefore, overall it's gone down when you breathe in and then breathe out. For carbon dioxide, it does the opposite. When you breathe in, it's only 0.04%, but when you breathe out, it goes up to 4%. And then nitrogen, it stays the same as 79%. Once you understand it, that sets the stage to answer the question. It says, explain the differences between the percentage of gases in inhaled air and in exhaled air. So 3 marks, guys, make it organized. 3 marks, what are they looking for? They're looking for you to explain each of these items. So just organize your answer into 3 parts. Oxygen, what happens to it? Carbon dioxide, what happens to it? And then nitrogen, what happens to it? Therefore, you make sure you get all 3 marks, get it? Right? So therefore, what happens to oxygen? Explain means you got to tell me why it goes down. You can't just tell me it goes down. Why does it go down? Think about it. When you inhale, it's 20%, and then it goes all the way into your down your trachea, bronchus, bronchiole, and the alveoli. Now, the alveoli, what happens? You have gas exchange, right? And gas exchange means that the oxygen will leave the alveoli and go into your blood, And that's why by the time you breathe it out, there's actually less oxygen. So that's exactly what you're going to put down. You're going to write, when you inhale, the oxygen enters the lungs and goes into the alveoli. So at the alveoli or alveolus, if you're talking about one of them, at the alveolus, oxygen diffuse into the blood. Use all these keywords, right? Diffuse into blood. And why? Why? What is the reaction that it needs to do eventually? For respiration. And that's why, so it exhaled air has less oxygen, okay? Carbon dioxide, exactly the opposite. What happens to carbon dioxide at the alveolus? At the alveolus, CO2 diffuse out of the blood because it's been produced in the blood. In fact, it's been produced in the cells from respiration, and then it's carried through the blood to the lungs so you can breathe it out. You have to breathe out the CO2 because it's a waste product that you have to get rid of. So at the alveolus, CO2 diffuse out of the blood, and you can say that is from respiration, right? That's why you would have CO2 in the blood in the first place. Okay, so exhaled air has more CO2. And then what happens to nitrogen? Stays the same. So say that. Stays the same. Because there's no reaction taking place, right? It's just breathe in and breathe out. So no reaction. So the key word here, guys, is respiration and diffusion and alveolus. Okay, next bit. So here it says air in the alveolus has a composition of 14% oxygen and 7% CO2. Suggest why the composition of air in the alveolus is different from the exhaled air. So let's look at the exhaled air. Let's color code this. So for oxygen, exhaled air is 16%, but in the alveoli, the oxygen is just 14%. And then for CO2, exhaled air is 4%, but in the alveoli, 7%. So again, think of what is happening in the alveoli. At the alveoli, the oxygen will leave it, right? It will leave the alveoli to go into the blood. And that's why there's only 14% as opposed to 16%. So I'm going to put that down first. That's the first point. At alveolus, oxygen diffuse out, right? Into the blood, diffuse out of the alveolus into the blood for respiration. So that's why it's only 14% at the alveoli, 14 instead of 16. And while we're here, let's talk about the CO2. Same thing. At the alveolus, the CO2 is going to diffuse out of the blood into the alveolus. And that's why there's more CO2 here. There's actually 7% as opposed to 4%. So same thing. At alveolus, CO2 diffuse into alveolus from the blood, right? From blood. Again, due to respiration. See? And that's why it's more. So there's 7%, which is more than the 4% of exhaled air up here. And there's one more point. Why is it 16% when you actually breathe it in, when at the alveoli, it's only 14%? It's because some of the oxygen you just breathed in, nothing happens to it. It gets breathed back out again. Do you get it? So that's why the exhaled air has a little bit more extra oxygen. If you come back to this diagram, it's like when you breathe in the oxygen, it goes down here. It doesn't actually get to the very end point. It just gets breathed back out again because you exhaled. You breathe in, breathe out. So some of the oxygen didn't actually get to reach the alveolus. It just breathed back out again. And that's why in exhaled air, you actually have a little bit more oxygen. You have 16%. So you can say here that exhaled air has more oxygen because some of the inhaled oxygen got breathed back out. Okay? All right. Next question. So this is a question on tobacco mosaic virus. And this is what it looks like. These are the virus particles. So this is a plant virus. It infects plant cells. And here it says tobacco mosaic virus particles consist of a molecule of RNA surrounded by coat. Which substance is the coat made from? So when you see multiple choice, one of your biggest techniques is to eliminate things you definitely know are wrong, right? Now, you know cellulose is wrong because it's not part of a virus. The only time you think about cellulose at IGCSE biology is it is the cell wall of plants, right? This is the cell wall of plants. And I'm not talking about plants here. We're talking about a virus. So of course, it's not A. Chitin, similarly, it is what the cell wall of fungi is made of. And we're not talking fungi here, we're talking virus. So again, B is wrong. Starch has nothing to do with a virus, right? This is the what glucose is stored as in a plant, right? This is a storage molecule in plants. So this got nothing to do with a virus, storage molecule in plants. So therefore the answer is protein. Next question, it says the virus particle labeled P has an actual length of 0.3 micrometers. Calculate the magnification. So you must be able to do magnification questions because it's usually 3 marks on the test and you want to get all those 3 marks. So remember this formula. Magnification formula is AIM. Memorize that first. AIM, like this. AIM. And what it stands for, each of these, is the A stands for actual, the actual size of the virus particle. The I stands for the image, which is basically printed on your exam paper. That's the image, right? And then the M stands for magnification. So make sure you have this equation in your mind first. Now, we are looking for the magnification. It says calculate the magnification. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange this equation to make M the subject. And you know why it's written like a triangle, right? It means that A is equals to I divided by M. That's why it's written like in that triangle. So let's rewrite this over here. Magnification is equals to I divided by A, right? Is equals to image divided by actual. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see what information they give me. They told me that the actual length is 0.3 micrometers. So actual. So I'm going to put that 0.3 into the actual. So that is 0.3 micrometers. The unit is very important. So always write down the unit. What about the image? What about the image? What is the length of the virus in the actual image? So you would go to this image, you would take out your ruler, remember to bring your ruler for the exam, and you would measure this length, right? You would just put your ruler there and you would measure it. And it is around 23 millimeters. This length here, this one here, is around 23 millimeters, which is 2.3 centimeters, okay? 2.3 centimeters. So now the image is 2.3 centimeters. Do I just do this division? Do I just do 2.3 divided by 0.3? Do I do that? Definitely not, because the unit is not the same. You can only divide when the unit is the same. So if you're using micrometers down here, you must convert this to micrometers. So how do we convert that? Centimeters to millimeters first, because that's easy. That is times by what? How do you convert centimeters to millimeters? Times by 10, isn't it? 1 centimeter is 10 millimeters. You can see that on your ruler. So times by 10, make sure it's times, not divide. Then you're going to convert millimeters to micrometers. And if you read, they give you some information here. They said 1 millimeter is equals to 1,000 micrometers. Therefore, to get to micrometers, I'm going to times by 1,000. Get it? So let me do that calculation. 2.3 times by 10 times by 1,000. That would give me 23,000. So therefore, this is 23,000. Again, write the unit so you remember what you're doing, micrometers. And once I have that, I have the same unit. Now I can divide these numbers. I'm going to divide 23,000 by 0.3. And the answer works out to be, well, my calculator says 76666.6 recurring. And you can put that number down just like that, or you could round it so that it looks a little nicer. Sometimes the question will ask you to put this to 2 decimal places or 2 significant figures, in which case, let's say they want 2 significant figures, then this answer will be what? Will be 77,000. Okay? So read the question carefully. If they don't say, then you can just write down the number directly from your calculator. So that's how you do magnification questions. Remember the formula. Remember how to convert between the different units, and you can only calculate the magnification when you have the same unit. Okay. Next question. It says the photograph shows the leaves of a plant infected by tobacco mosaic virus. Plant cells infected with the virus stop making chloroplast. Ooh, that's important. What is chloroplast for? For photosynthesis, yeah? Explain why plants that are infected with the virus grow more slowly than uninfected plants. So when you read this, you look at the keywords that they're trying to hint you on, which is chloroplast. So if the virus infects the plant and therefore makes the plant unable to make chloroplast, then what happens? You would link that up. Okay, so no chloroplast means that plant cannot do what? Keyword. That's right, photosynthesis. And then keep going. Photosynthesis, what does it produce? What does photosynthesis produce? I hope you remember the formula. In fact, write this down. So photosynthesis is glucose. That was to test you. That's not glucose. It is CO2 plus H2O makes glucose and oxygen in the presence of 2 things, in the presence of sunlight and chloroplast, isn't it? Right? So therefore, if the plant does not have chloroplast, therefore you cannot do this reaction. Therefore, you will not make glucose and you will not make oxygen. And that's exactly what you put down. So you put down less glucose. If you think about it, the glucose is what matters in terms of plant growth, right? It's asking you, why does it grow slowly? Because it's got less glucose. Why would having less glucose make it unable to grow? Because glucose is used for what? For respiration. So less glucose, less respiration. And what's the key word linked to respiration? Less energy. Less energy. And if you have less energy of a plant, as a plant, how can you grow very well? Does that make sense? It's all linked up. One more point here is that without the chloroplast, it says the plant cannot do photosynthesis. Just one extra point is that the reason it cannot do photosynthesis is because it cannot absorb the sunlight. So the chloroplast it helps the plant to absorb the sunlight and turn that energy from the sun into chemical energy, which is stored in the glucose. That's how you make glucose. Get the big picture? Okay. So question 3 says, a diagram shows a part of a woodland food web. Now, just want to make sure everyone knows what's the difference between a food web and a food chain. A food web is what you're seeing in this diagram. It's got lots of different animals. It's quite complex. There's different branches, whereas a food chain is just one of these pathways. For example, this would be a food chain. Just go from here to here to here, right? Or another food chain would be here, from here to here to here. So that's the difference between a food web and a food chain. That's important because sometimes you'll be asked to draw these. Another note to draw your attention to is the direction of the arrows. What these arrows actually mean. Do you know what they actually mean? It's not just drawn there to connect the different animals. They mean energy. They mean a flow of energy flow. So therefore, it means things getting eaten, because when something eats something else, their energy gets consumed by the eater, right? So that's important because sometimes my students, they draw the arrows the opposite way, which is wrong. So when you look at it, it's basically the trees get eaten by the mouse, and then the mice gets eaten by the fox. That's the flow of the energy. Okay, so now looking at the actual question now, it says, which organism is a primary consumer in this food web? So let's label. Let's actually have to start at the bottom of the food web, which is the producer. The producer is the plants. They usually do photosynthesis. And then the primary consumer are the animals that eat the producer. So these are the primary consumers. They're usually herbivores, and therefore they eat the plants, which are the producers. And therefore the answer is aphid, because only aphid is in my purple area. And down here it says, which of these describes the woodland community? So community, the definition of a community is all of the different species living in that area. And that's important to remember because sometimes they'll ask you to define community. And let's also revise the other words here. Abiotic and biotic factors. This is the definition of an ecosystem. An ecosystem is, well, the abiotic factors are the non-living things in that ecosystem, and the biotic are the living things. So if you just imagine you're this little mouse, right? If you're the little mouse, where you're living, there are living things, other living things that affect your life. For example, things that might eat you, the foxes in the area, the birds that could catch you, the plants that are available. These are all living things that impact your survival. But there are also abiotic factors such as the sunlight, the rainfall, the soil pH, the rivers. These are non-living things that are also in where you live, and it impacts your survival. So that's why an ecosystem has to include both the living and the non-living factors. Another thing to draw attention to is here, all the blackbirds. So here, this is the definition of a population. A population is basically the same species. So I'm talking about all of the blackbirds. That would be a population. Again, that could be asked as a 2-mark definition question. So part B, this is one food chain from the food web, from the oak tree to mouse to fox, and these arrows represent the direction of energy flow. Therefore, the tree gets eaten by the mouse gets eaten by the fox. And if you're thinking, how can a tree get eaten by a mouse? Not the whole tree is getting eaten, okay? It's just little bits of the tree can get eaten by the mouse. And those will flow into the mouse as energy. And it says, the student counted 20 mice. So that's 20 mice, 4 oak trees, and 2 foxes. And they asked you to draw a pyramid of numbers for this food chain on the grid, and it has to be drawn to scale. It means that it's got to it's all got to make sense numerically. So when I think about how to draw this pyramid, I got to think about the widest part, which is the 20 mice. So how can I represent 20 on this graph? The most sensible way would be to have 4 big squares, each of them representing 5, which adds up to 20. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to draw that like this, and this would represent 20 mice. Then I'm going to think, how am I going to draw 4 oak trees? How can I represent 4 oak trees on this graph? So you have to, let's do a little key down here, right? So this width here represents 5, because we just said that, right? 5, 10, 15, 20. So this is 5. So 5, the length is actually 10 little boxes. 10 little boxes, right? Is 5. So therefore, what is one little box? One little box. And by little box, I mean like this little box, right? So by one little box, what is that? What is that? Then you do the maths. So to get from 10 to 1, I divide by 10. So therefore, to do the same thing on the other side, divide by 10 as well. 5 divided by 10 is 0.5. And that means one little box is 0.5. That's important because I need 4. I need to get to 4 trees. So one little box is 0.5. How many little boxes is 4? That will be 0.5 times by 8 little boxes make 4. So I need to have 8 boxes that cover the width for the oak trees. And if you imagine an invisible line down the center, it's got to be symmetrical, right? So therefore, if I need 8 little boxes, I will have 4 boxes this way and 4 boxes this way to make a total of 8 boxes, which equals to 4 oak trees. So therefore, my box would look like this. Okay. And of course, make sure you draw the oak tree at the bottom because that's where you draw the producers, right? Finally, we do the foxes. Foxes is half the number of oak trees. Therefore, it'll just be 2 boxes this way and 2 boxes this way, 4 boxes total, which represent the 2 foxes. Like this. And of course, you label it. All right, next. Okay, so here it says photosynthesis results in 25,000 kilojoules of energy being transferred to the biomass of the oak trees. What that means is, I like to label as I go along. So 25,000 kilojoules is the energy in these trees. Let's label it. This is 25,000 kilojoules. Then it says only 8% of this energy is transferred to the 20 mice above it. So only 8% gets transferred to the mice. And you're supposed to calculate the mean amount of energy transferred to the biomass of 1 mouse each year. So I'm going to show the examiner all of my workings. 25,000 kilojoules times by 8%, which is 8 divided by 100, right? That should equals to 2,000 kilojoules, which is the energy in 20 mice, And then it's asking for 1. So what is the energy in 1 mouse? Then you just divide both sides by 20, right? Because 20 mice divided by 20 is 1 mouse. So 2,000 divided by 20 is equals to 100. 100 kilojoules. And that will be the answer. And the last bit, it says, explain why only 8% of the energy stored in the biomass of oak tree is used by the mouse for growth. Basically, why only 8%? Where did the remaining 92% go? Where did it go? And you got to think of all the ways that energy can be lost from this tree level to the mouse level, all the different ways that energy does not end up in the mouse level. So what can happen? Many things. The tree might not all get eaten, so not all of the tree is eaten. Even if it does get eaten, the mouse will poop it out, pee it out. So poo and pee means to ingest and to excrete. And if they poo and pee these things out, then that energy is not going to be used for growing for the mouse. Sometimes the mouse might die, and if it dies, then of course that energy is no longer in the mouse anymore because it will decompose, right? So I'm going to put down all of these points. Not all of trees are eaten by mouse. Eaten. Mouse might die. Mice may die. Mice do excretion, which is urination, and you're getting rid of the urea, which is the waste product, and therefore losing that energy. Mice do egestion, which is pooping. Same idea there. And also, mice do respiration. When you do respiration, a lot of the energy is transferred to heat energy, and heat energy is just lost to the environment, and therefore is not going to be used for the growth of the mouse. What have we covered so far? Pink box, this is the anatomy of the lung. Make sure you can label everything on this diagram. Also know what happens to the diaphragm, the intercostal muscle, and the volume of the thorax when you inhale and when you exhale. Blue box, this is the equation for magnification, AIM. A equals the I divided by M. A is the actual size of whatever the question is about. So in this case, it's a virus. It's too small. A is too small for you to measure. So they usually tell you what A is. I, that's the actual size of the image printed on the exam paper. That's what you measure. So you take out your ruler and you measure the length of that virus. Once you do that, you have I, and they give you A. Then you divide I by A to get M. But before you do any calculation, please make sure the unit of I and A are the same. In other words, if they gave you A in micrometers and you measured your I in centimeters, then you have to convert your centimeters to micrometers. How do you do that? You can times by 10 to get millimeters, and then times by 1,000 to get micrometers. And then you can do the division. Micrometers is important because it's usually the size of cells, bacteria, viruses, and it's important to be able to convert between micrometers and centimeters. Green box down here, this is just a revision of the photosynthesis equation. Black box here, this is a very good question for plotting graphs. In this case, a pyramid of numbers. When you plot these, use up as much of the grid paper as they give you and use the correct scale, label, use a ruler. Finally, purple box down here, this is a food web and this is a food chain, and the arrows represent energy flow. In other words, direction of being eaten. And lastly, know the definition for ecosystem, population, and community.